and a general report of progress, lack thereof, or whatever. And this went on for some 20 years. And then after approximately 20 years, or close to that, somebody in Congress decides to start reading these reports. Instead of just stuffing them in some cubbyhole, they started reading them. They found out about mind control. At that point, somebody in Congress blew their lid, said, what if mind control, if they're building this sort of stuff, they might use it on us. Cancel the project. The project was canceled, and the scientists were thrown out of Brookhaven, and they were looking, of course, for a new home to continue their research. And they found it not far from Brookhaven, which was in the eastern half of Long Island. They went a little further east to a location called Montauk area, and there was a military base called Fort Hero, which was operational. There was an Army base and an Air Force base at that time. The Army part of the base had been there since before World War I. The Navy was there with submarine pens since before World War I. But the Air Force moved in the early 60s with some specialized radar systems they were testing long range over the ocean, and eventually the SAGE system was moved in there about 1963. And that was decommissioned about 68, 69 because they went to the DuLine project in Canada, still longer range and further north, and all of the SAGE systems around the U.S. were dropped. In that interim, the base was abandoned. It was held as surplus property by the General Services Administration, and this group who was already there stayed.
The mind control group.
The mind control group. And they continue their projects. Now, other projects under the Phoenix Project, and I cannot say I know all of those which have been put under that little umbrella. Phase 1 was mind control, and that was moved to Montauk. That is to that location at the abandoned base. And MK Ultra was only one program. There were many others. You also had other programs underway, which started in 47, went on through 52, for finding the basis for changing the memory structure, changing the personality completely and totally if the CIA or whatever agency wanted to do this. And these programs were instituted by Dr. Wilhelm Reich in Rangeley, Maine in 1947 when he signed a 5-year contract with the CIA to do research, which was, according to what he was given to understand at the beginning, the initial point, the CIA was, quote, interested in two aspects. One was development of psychic ability, finding a means to improve or enhance psychic ability. The second part was they wanted to find a means to deprogram people who had been programmed.
To brainwash them?
Well, they didn't.
Old memories?
They didn't state that to Reich, but he soon found out that's what they wanted. And he blew his stack and falsified the experiments.
Contract killers,
right. He found basically the means whereby you can totally reprogram a human mind at will and change its structure, its intent, its the memory patterns and memory functions. Commands are being built in to control that individual so they were no longer a free agent, even though they might be under the impression they were. Certain command methods could be used to have that pre-programmed person on command do something which had already been programmed into them by the CIA, NSA, or whoever was using these techniques. This was all part of the mind control programs of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And this stemmed from basically German work and from some Japanese work, because the Japanese work comes into the picture later in the 70s onward using RF techniques, microwave, and satellites. But this required a great deal more research in between after the beginning programs of the 40s and the 50s. Wilhelm Reich threatened to expose the whole business to the public, and he was then they attempted to hold him to court once in 1954. He refused to show and he got away with it. He sent a letter to the judge. But he was inherently unhappy with what he had been used for and said he would never work for the CIA again. In fact, all of his lab personnel were armed to the teeth to keep out from one particular government agency, and that was the FDA. If any FDA personnel ever showed up on any of his lab property, orders were to shoot first and ask questions afterwards. Other government agencies cooperated with.
It was very interesting for me, the connection that you were discussing yesterday between some certain indoctrination techniques by Indian yogi cults that were later introduced into the CIA, indoctrination techniques that involved some specialized sexual practices.
Oh, this had nothing to do with yoga practices. This was a direct offshoot from the Wilhelm Reich techniques and Wilhelm Reich's research. Basically, we'll not go into the whole 9 yards of it on camera, but basically what Reich discovered in that 5-year period, 47 to 52, was that there was a great relationship between the mental functioning of the human and sex, and the orgiastic state, as he called it, and that he found that in the orgiastic state, if you could hold that point where the person was about ready to have an orgasm, but not have the orgasm, you were held at a peak point of nervous excitation. At that point, the human subconscious and the human conscious locked together in an open line. And everything that's in the subconscious becomes available to the conscious mind.
The soul connects to the mind.
Right. Therefore, you can reprogram that person if you know what you're doing. And Reich found out partially how it could be done. And the CIA, after many years of work, and the NSA found out how you could complete this so that a person could be programmed with certain inbuilt mechanisms, functions, memories, change memories, whatever. And while the initial techniques were more physical, after sometime in the 70s, they developed purely electronic techniques which would induce